Welcome to the Den. This is where we talk about the parts of IT reuse that don't get enough airtime, the messy bits, the operational realities, and the things that look simple until you actually try to do them at scale. Each episode will pick apart one real problem, what goes wrong, why it's harder than it looks, and what good actually means in practice. Hello and welcome to this episode of The Den. Today I'm John Woodward from NovaFox, and I'm with Adam Burrett, founder of NovaFox. Hi there, Adam. How you doing?
Hey, John, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Right. So today we wanted to look at a subject that's close to our hearts, I guess. Why networking reuse is harder than it looks. And what I mean by that, within the ITAD world, data erasure, data sanitization is a subject that we're all familiar with, and especially around enterprise equipment, storage, servers, and then even into end user compute. But when it comes to networking, everyone gets a little bit kind of scared and goes, well, hang on a minute, what is data erasure and networking? So what I really wanted to do today was kind of dissect that a little bit, get into the nuts and bolts of it, and understand, what those challenges are. Hence why it's probably scarier than it needs to be, I think. So from your opinion, Adam, what do you think the challenges are with processing networking equipment?
It's a good question. I think networking equipment it's a really wide scope. Everyone thinks of networking equipment as switches and routers and access points and firewalls, but you've got other things, and there are things that fall into that category that people don't necessarily associate it. Things like load balancers, proxy servers. It's really, really wide. And the biggest challenge across all of it is that they are all different. It's not like a hard drive. A hard drive is simple
Yeah.
in terms of erasure. You run a command, you wipe the hard drive. With networking equipment, they're not the same. They all, even between vendors, manufacturers, models, firmware, they're all subtly slightly different. So the expertise needed and the experience needed to process them is a lot harder than processing a hard drive.
Right, no, that makes sense. So I guess really the issue is just a complete lack of standardization. And as you're saying, if you're raising Windows laptops, there's standardization from vendor to vendor. But you were saying also even within the same vendors, there's lack of standardization there. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, let's take Cisco. Biggest one on the market is Cisco. You've got Cisco switches. They range from the 2960 up to the 3850 to the Nexus switches. And as you move through those models and those series, they're different. So the way you process a 2960 is completely different to a 3850. The way you process a 3850 is completely different to a Nexus.
Right.
And the actual where the storage is, where the storage media is, and the required commands and the level of complexity is infinitely harder. Once you move into routers and access points, again, you process a small router in one way, you'd process a chassis router in a completely different way. And there's very little, not only is there little standardization, there's little documentation. So it's not, you're going to spend time researching what other people think is right in order to work out how to process these devices, rather than the manufacturer saying, this is how you process ththese devices. It's a nightmare. Minefield.
So I'm guessing from an ITAD's point of view, trying to process a workflow in, it's going to be very dependent on the individual skills and talents of the engineers working on the product. I guess that's going to be the overall challenge for any ITAD, right?
It is. I mean, it's anyone trying to deal with this kind of kit is going to have the same problem. And then you put a process in and it will work. And then the next time you get a device that's subtly different and it won't work. I mentioned 2960. Within 2960, you have a 2960, a 2960G, a 2960C, a 2960X, and they are they're mostly the same, but they are subtly different.
Right.
Some of them will have a command that will allow you to erase everything, and some of them have a command that will allow you to erase some of it, and some of it will just not have a command to erase any of it. So it's not as straightforward as following a script, because you're going to come across things that are different every single time.
Okay. So when we're looking at that process, and I hear a lot of people talking about, factory resets as a kind of default, I've returned it back to its original state. That myth of the factory reset, what's the challenge around that? And is that a good practice, or does it have its limitations? What's your thoughts?
I think factory reset is one of those things. At the moment, that is the standard because that's what everyone knows. So, but as the world moves on and we realize that actually factory reset, you do a factory reset, you're leaving data behind, and you look at things like the NIST standard and they talk about factory reset and they say that it's not complete. It's not, it doesn't mean you have erased the device. And it could just be a case that factory reset deletes pointers to files, or it just deletes a config file but leaves everything else like the log files and things like that behind, or it doesn't actually do anything and it just makes it so that when you start it again, you just get a default config screen. The old config is still sitting there. The challenge with factory reset is there's no way to verify anything. You press it, you think it's right. You may not have pressed it for the right amount of time. The only way you're checking is, can I log in with default credentials, yes or no? That's not really a safe sanitization. And some of these devices, they're not just a case of a network switch or an access point. We're talking about routers and firewalls, which are internet connecting. They have, you're potentially leaving the keys to your office on eBay for someone to go and buy. You accidentally sell it to the wrong person and, they're in your network. It's not like with a hard drive, if someone gets hold of it, they've got that data, that snapshot in time. If someone gets hold of a networking device and your engineers have either used the same or similar login credentials, or even if they've set particular things up on that device, they can have access to other parts of your network without you thinking about it. You are leaving a door open into your corporate network or to your customer's corporate network, which gives you damage to reputation. It gives you damage to, the integrity of that network and all you've done is factory reset and sold it on the internet. You've done what your process tells you, but you've left a lot of valuable data on that device.
So I guess in simple terms, a factory reset is kind of no different than hit and delete on a hard drive. In that, effectively you've said, right, that area is usable now, but as we know it with data sanitization, the only real way of safely removing is by overwriting it with a random data pattern. And then I guess unless you're doing that, you can't really be sure that you've removed the data that's on that device. And what sort of data is on there? What could you find?
Yeah, you're right. So just a factory reset, you are leaving files on there. If you look at, I would look at networking devices as a pyramid. Okay, so at the bottom of that pyramid, you've got your switches. If you look at the risk that's in there, we're talking about VLANs, passwords, potentially for your switching network. The VLANs give you an indication of how that network is structured. You'd have access to things like the security processes, the security protocols that are enabled on that switch. There's lots of them. There is risk there, but in order to fully maximize use of that risk, you need physical access to that network. If you think about a retail store, if you've got a big multi-chain retail store and you can get hold of a local switch or a switch from that retail store, you can plug into the wall because they have network ports all around the shop. And from there, you'd be able to compromise it because you'd know the layout of what you're compromising. Then if
Right.
you do the next level up, you've got things like access points. Access points, similar to a switch really, except that you don't have physical connection, you've got wireless connection. And if the customers have enabled the higher end network security, ironically, they're leaving more things on that access point for access. Things like radius credentials, domain controller credentials, things like that, where, you can log into certain networks now just by using your Windows logins. That has to be authenticated somewhere.
Right.
Then the next layer above that, you have your routers. So routers or routers for our American friends. You've got um, that's internet facing. So then you've got your external perimeter network addresses. You've got ports that are allowed to come in. So a port is like a pinhole through the firewall. You allow certain things in, you block most other stuff. So you're narrowing down that attack vector. Okay, on this customer, we are going to hit this and this and this. The chances are those IP addresses haven't changed. You don't change IP addresses often. It's a pain in the neck to change a firewall IP address or a router IP
Right.
address.
Yeah.
It's the same. Potentially the passwords are the same, but you'll also have in these ones things like VPNs. So you have a virtual private network connection for people that are out on the road dialing into your network. Those credentials, those configurations will be present, and you'll be, if you haven't erased it, you can pull it back with relatively simple techniques. And then you have the firewalls. Now, firewalls are basically an addition on top of a router. That's the top of the pyramid. If someone gets access to your firewall and you've left your configuration on there, they now have the keys to get into anywhere. You know, Most of the time, the configuration on a new firewall is going to be practically exactly the same as the old firewall, because all you're doing is adding a new piece of hardware, or you're taking it to the new vendor or something. The old firewall is very, very similar in configuration. So the attack vectors are the same. If from here, you've got VPNs, you've got admin credentials to various parts of the network because of the way they work. You've got pinholes, you've got, everything that a hacker would want, that normally they would have to run a perimeter scan to get, and then potentially get blocked out because that's the way they work. They can then target what they're looking for on a whole nother level from a router. So it's big.
Yeah.
That's the pyramid. So the tip, there's not many firewalls that end up on eBay or that end up being disposed of, because A, they're very expensive, and B, you only probably need one or two or three for a corporate network, but they are the crown jewels. So there's layers of security risk, but we have to treat everything in the same way. That's kind of the way you need to look at it.
Pretty scary, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think it's safe to say that, in the past, um, just because of the complexity of networking kit, from an ITAD point of view, they've kind of been pretty much ignored. But I guess that, the world is changing, and people are starting to realize that, we need to take them seriously. We need to process them, because, as you said, they are that bunch of keys to get into somebody's network, somebody's business. So where do you think, in terms of, compliancy is? We've got various standards that the ITADs have all been working to over the years. R2 is obviously probably the biggest worldwide, ADISA here in the UK, in Europe. Where do you feel those standards and that compliancy sits within terms of where networking is, and where does it need to be?
Okay, I think that's a good one, because if you look at where we were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the standards weren't there really for networking equipment at all. If you look, you mentioned R2, but if we go to NIST and we look at NIST version 1, a NIST clear would have counted if you did a factory reset. Even now, a NIST clear still counts if you do a factory reset, with a massive caveat under both of them. This
Right.
probably remove the data, but it's a NIST clear. So you had ITAD going, we're doing a NIST clear. That was accepted. And then, we're now moving into the current world where we've got things, and the standards are catching up. ADISA is catching up, R2 is catching up, and they're starting to stipulate that a factory reset isn't really enough anymore.
Right.
And I think the thing that's really twisting it is, at the moment, all of these standards, they don't, they want to move away from shred rather, they don't want to destroy, they want to reuse.
Obviously,
And
yeah. Yeah,
it
absolutely.
can't be, there's a really difficult point where, if it's not actually possible, you're just going to end up destroying everything, which isn't good for the environment. It's good for security, but it's not great for the environment. But then that we're in this place where there isn't really an alternative. So I think now that products are starting to come through that gives an alternative to destruction, all of the standards are catching up. And I think it's going to take a bit of time. I think probably this year and next year, we're going to really start seeing the requirements change to say, no, you need to do this to your products,
Yeah.
which is the right approach. And that is what we need to happen.
So if I'm right, I think R2 now talk about Appendix B, or listing products in Appendix B. They've now said that networking equipment should be treated in the same way that any other data-bearing device is treated, right?
Yeah, which is the right approach. That's the new change, and that's a really big move
Yeah.
forward.
Okay.
I think one of the challenges as well that all of these standards have to make sure they don't fall into is making an impossible standard. Because it's networking equipment, there's only certain areas that you can write to. We can go in and make an impossible test that you would never pass, and that's a danger that we still have to contend with. is that,
Yeah, it's got to be
you have
real
to, there's
world, and
limits.
it's
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, we've always said, isn't it? With any data erasure, on whatever product or whatever platform, obviously, absolute, it's physical destruction, but of course, that comes with, a load of things we don't want to be doing in terms of environmental impact. We want to be promoting reuse, and also within the ITAD sector, we are businesses. ITADs have to make money, and the remarketing element of what ITAD does is a very, very important part of it. If it was just disposal only, and no offsetting of any costs, then obviously that's not going to be particularly attractive, from a business point of view. So, I mean, obviously there are a number of solutions out there, and we don't want to get into talking about particular products as such, but in terms of what does a solution need to look like? What does it have to give the ITAD for it to be a credible tool in their arsenal?
I think if you look at, well, but there's various solutions out on the market. I think there's two key points. First of all, simplicity. We know that one of the hardest things when people are using these kinds of products is plugging it in the right place.
Yeah,
As you know, that is the
it's
most
my challenge.
complicated. That's the most complicated part you want these systems to have, because that's a physical restriction. It would be amazing if we could just get a box and plonk it on top of something,
Yeah,
maybe sometime in the future. But that's the hardest thing you want it to be, is how do I plug it in? And then you press a button. Similar to how you deal with, that's no different to a laptop or a desktop that you're wiping using an erasure solution. You still have to plug it in the right way. You still have to configure it in the right way, and then you press go.
yeah.
You want networking equipment to be that simple. That's the key to any product. It has to be
But I
that
guess the
easy.
solution has to take the complexity out of it,
Exactly.
and de-skill the process, but also, I suppose, give the process a repeatable action in that you're getting, the same result by doing the same thing the same way. That I guess is also critical, right?
Yeah, as I say, simplicity and making it so it's repeatable, so you don't have to be trained on every single product. You just train, like, this is how it works. Off you go. That should work. I think the other thing is confidence. So you need, if you're saying you're erasing something, prove it. Now,
Yeah,
you may not have to prove it there and then, because, again, certain things are a challenge with networking equipment, but you should certainly have before any product is added to any device like this, you should certainly have the backing to say, right, we know it does this because we have checked this.
yeah,
You know, that confidence for the certification is critical. And I think, we've got certifications out there. There are checks that are done. They're just going to be broader in scope. And I think that's, again, another thing that all of these products need. But confidence in the certification and the fact that you're doing and the product does what it says it does is critical as well.
absolutely. And I guess, it's, as you said, I think you referred back to, 2 or 3 years ago. This is still really new. This risk, is new. So I guess it's going to take time for products to come out there, solutions to come out there, for the certification bodies to catch up. Things don't change quickly, or as quickly as we'd like necessarily in our industry. There are hoops we have to go through.
There are. And I think, I'd say, I could pick up on one point, because you said the risk is new. The risk isn't new. The risk has always been there. It's the
Right.
realization that the risk exists is new. So
Yeah.
the risk, there's been that risk. And, in many cases, some of the older kit is even more of a risk than the new kit, because some of the manufacturers are starting to catch up. They are starting to provide us the ability to run a purge.
Okay.
you know, and whereas historically, a lot of the time there was no, purge wasn't even considered. It was a factory reset. That's it. Be happy with it. But no, so the manufacturers are catching up. The risk has always been there. The realization that that risk is there, not only by the ITADs, but also by ITAD customers, that's really starting to come out over
Yeah.
the
Well,
last
that's
few
where it's going to
years.
be driven, isn't it? It's going to be
Yeah,
driven by the users, by the corporates that have identified the risk, and now we're expecting ITADs to come up with a solution that they can, provide evidence and proof
yeah,
that,
exactly. And the
and
world is changing. The world has changed massively. 2, 3 years ago, we knew hacking existed. 4 years ago, it was on the periphery. But particularly over the last 12 to 18 months, the compromises and the frequency of compromises and the frequency of big hacks has gone up and up and up. So people are now really looking at this as, are we actually as secure as we think we are? And are we disposing of our assets correctly? It's changing the whole market.
Brilliant. Okay, well, look, thanks for your time today, Adam. That's been really, really useful. I think there's been interesting insights there that people will find useful. So,
Thank-
yeah, we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, speak to you soon.
All right,
Thank you so much.
take care.
Cheers, John.
Bye
Thanks,
now.
bye.